Hi there guys, I hope you have had a good day. Now, Anthony Joshua has warned Mike Tyson ahead of his return on September 12th against Roy Jones Jr. Do not get in with the young lions of this era because Mike Tyson can no longer compete with the young lions of this era. Now, obviously, Mike Tyson is coming back against someone who is a similar age to him in Roy Jones Jr. and is a legend of the sport just as Mike Tyson is. And that's the right kind of fight for Mike Tyson. It is an exhibition, but let me tell you this, I don't believe it's going to be an exhibition come fight night because these are both two fighters and Mike Tyson isn't just going to stand there, jab a bit and move a bit. He's going to fight. That's what Mike Tyson does. He likes to fight, come forward with that bobbing and weaving style, and ultimately it's going to catch fire at some point because exhibitions seem to be a bit cloudy. You don't know what it really means. Does it mean that, oh, it's just a jab here and there, smile to the cameras and all of that, have a bit of fun? Or is it a proper fight? The line can be quite blurry, and they are going to be wearing 12-ounce gloves on fight night, so maybe it could catch fire at some point. But Mike Tyson fighting Roy Jones Jr. is one thing. Going back in there with Anthony Joshua or Tyson Fury, maybe even Deontay Wilder, that's another thing entirely, and Anthony Joshua does not advise Mike Tyson even considers doing that. Now, I'm guessing this comes in the wake of Mike Tyson saying that he'd smash all of the heavyweights of this era and believing that no man realistically on the planet could beat a prime Mike Tyson. Roy Jones Jr. said something similar in saying that Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, neither of those two would be able to beat Mike Tyson or himself. So there is some back and forth between the two eras. It's kind of respectful in all of that, but ultimately the older era are always saying that they would beat this new era of heavyweights. Now, Roy Jones against Anthony Joshua, Roy Jones against Tyson Fury would not realistically be a fair matchup because they are just so much bigger than him. Even Mike Tyson, they're huge compared to him. The heavyweights of today are just so much bigger than they were back then. I mean, Roy Jones Jr. moved up to heavyweight to fight John Ruiz for the WBA world title. John Ruiz was 6'1", 6'2", maybe a little bit taller, maybe 6'3", but ultimately that today is a small heavyweight. Roy Jones is 5'11". He weighed in, I think, just under 200 pounds, which was under the cruiserweight limit. So ultimately, Roy Jones wasn't really a fully flourished heavyweight going in there against John Ruiz, but he didn't need to be because his skill was enough. But against Anthony Joshua, against Tyson Fury, would his skill be enough? Is he going to go the whole 12 rounds without getting hit? And if he gets hit from someone who's 6'9", 19 stone, or 6'6", and say 17.5 stone, I mean, Roy Jones at 195 or 197 is ultimately going to find it very difficult to take a punch like that. And it's not just about that. Can Roy Jones outmaneuver them? Because if they get in close and tie him up, they're going to lean on him. They're going to use their size and weight. Can Roy Jones deal with that? I mean, Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua aren't just bigger than John Ruiz. They are also faster, stronger, better movers, more powerful. So ultimately, Roy Jones beat John Ruiz, but Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury are completely different prospects entirely. Now, Mike Tyson is a flourished heavyweight. He was used to fighting bigger people anyway because he's like 5'10". He's even smaller than Roy Jones height-wise, but for his build and how stocky he is, he's around, 210, 220. So he's not a small heavyweight. He's on the smaller side. But back then, again, heavyweights were smaller. They're a lot bigger now. But a prime Mike Tyson, you would have to... you would never bet against him. Really in there with anyone. But the one thing about this argument is you cannot get a prime Mike Tyson, a prime Roy Jones Jr., and put them in with a prime Anthony Joshua and a prime Tyson Fury because the young lions of today, Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua, are peaking now. Roy Jones and Mike Tyson peaked back then. So there is no way to do it and have it be a fair fight. There is no way to put these guys in with one another and see who would be number one. No simulations, no breakdowns, no opinions can change the fact that we will never know who would have won those fights. But ultimately, that's the way it should be. It's two different eras. And of course, the era before is always going to say they would have beaten the era of today. I mean, in 20 years' time, we will likely be having the same conversation about this era beating the era that comes next. It always happens. It's kind of a nostalgia thing. The last era was always better than this one. And I think it is just a little bit of nostalgia, but obviously Anthony Joshua is the one who has warned Mike Tyson at the age of 54, do not get in with the young lions, because ultimately, why does he need to? He's already achieved so much, and on the pads he looks brilliant, in training he looks brilliant. He does not look like a 54-year-old man. Age is a stigma, it doesn't matter, it's nothing, it's a number, it doesn't matter. Your biological age matters way more than just mathematics. So Mike Tyson looks brilliant today. On the pads, in training, brilliant. But against a fighter like a young hungry lion who is active as well, like Anthony Joshua, like Tyson Fury, Mike Tyson at this stage has no business being in the ring with them. But Roy Jones Jr., okay, that's fair enough. It's an even playing field. They're both the same age. They are both at similar points in their life as well. They have both been through a lot, both had, I think, more than 50 fights in their career. So they're at a similar point. It's an even playing field, as I said. Similar sort of size now. Roy Jones is a little bit bigger because obviously he moved up to cruiserweight during his penultimate years in the sport of boxing. So the size isn't going to be that much different. I mean, Mike Tyson is going to be bigger anyway because he's the natural heavyweight, but still, it's going to be an even playing field between these two fighters. Say they get in with a young fighter of today, not an even playing field, just because of the fact that those guys, Roy Jones and Mike Tyson, have been through over 50 fights. The young guys of today may have had 20, 30 fights and still be in their prime. So it's just not fair to have a fighter from the era before and a fighter of this era. And everything else aside, what does Mike Tyson have to prove now? What does Roy Jones Jr. have to prove now? They beat the best of their time. They beat many champions. They were 2-time, 3-time world champions. So what do they have to prove now? Anthony Joshua did say that Mike Tyson is looking brilliant on the pads, explosive. It's what he was born to do. It comes natural to him because he's a born fighter. And he will always fight. But at this stage, it has to be on an even playing field, just as it was even back then. I mean, back then, they weren't fighting fighters who were older than them. I mean, not like retired fighters coming back. It is always an even playing field. You get in there. If you are not good enough, you do not win. If you are good enough, you come out victorious. That's the way boxing works. And at the moment, we want to see undisputed. We want to see these guys get in with one another. We don't want to see Anthony Joshua or Tyson Fury getting in with someone who was incredible back then, a legend, because they are a legend in their own right. We need these defining fights now. We want to see Anthony Joshua get in there with Tyson Fury. We want to see Anthony Joshua fight maybe Dillian White again. We want to see Tyson Fury fight Anthony Joshua and Dillian White. I mean, Andy Ruiz Jr. as well. There are big fights for this era of heavyweights to tackle. There is no need to go and tackle someone from back then. So, I mean, Mike Tyson has never said that he wants to fight someone of this era, but he did say, I'm back. And maybe he did imply that he wanted to come back in a real fight against someone who was maybe ranked in the top 50, 60 currently in the heavyweight division. And maybe he would beat them, but that would only be damaging for Mike Tyson because he would go on and on and on until he reached someone of note. So it's not good for Mike Tyson to be getting in there with the younger guys of this generation because we want to see them fighting the best of this era. So we can have a legend, so we can have someone who has the same legacy or similar to the guys back then. The only way they can do that is by fighting one another, not fighting fighters who were legends back then. So guys, anyway, what are your thoughts on this? Anthony Joshua has explained that Mike Tyson should steer clear of the young lions of today. I mean, Mike Tyson never really said that he wanted to fight someone of this era. He never said that. He did make that video where he said, I'm back. So maybe in some capacity he did imply it. But we didn't know back then what he planned to do. We do now because obviously the exhibition between him and Roy Jones Jr. has been confirmed for September 12th. So we do know now what capacity he meant that in. And Roy Jones Jr. versus Mike Tyson will be a good way for Mike Tyson to maybe have a send-off or maybe just start having some more exhibition fights. We don't know what the plan is for Mike Tyson. I guess we will know more after September 12th. But ultimately what we want to see is the young guys fighting one another because they haven't just yet. That's what we want to see. Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Joshua White. Joshua Ruiz again, maybe. Tyson Fury, Joshua, Tyson Fury, Dillian White, and even against Andy Ruiz Jr. Those are the fights that make sense at the moment. Anyway, guys, what are your thoughts on this? Make sure you leave your thoughts in the comments below, leave a thumbs up, and subscribe if you are new. Thanks, guys.